Pakistan and India were on the brink of full-out war last week. It was the top headline and front page of literally every major news outlet, which we as journalists know is pretty rare. It's hard to get that prime news real estate when it comes to global conflicts.
Well, maybe it got that attention because both countries are nuclear powers, and Trump himself, well, he says he helped negotiate the ceasefire. That's a little disputed, which we'll get into a little later. But the ceasefire does seem shaky because there's already been reports of shelling on both sides.
So to rewind a little, on April 22nd, militants killed 26 Indian tourists in the Himalayan region of Kashmir. And right after the attack, Indian officials blamed Pakistan because the country has supported militant and terrorist activity in the region before. But Pakistan has denied any involvement and was even open to an international investigation after this attack.
And then a group called the Resistance Front popped up and took responsibility for it, but then later, they took that back, so it's hard to know what to do with that.
That was confusing.
But Indian officials believe that group is a proxy for the Pakistani terrorist group that carried out the infamous 2008 Mumbai attacks, which killed 160 people.
So after this attack, tensions slowly started escalating. India stopped streaming Pakistani shows, and the two countries canceled visas for each other's nationals. And then India upped the ante by suspending a 65-year-old treaty that governs water sharing between the two countries, meaning Pakistan, which is largely like a farming country, wouldn't have water down the line. So this was all problematic, but since the two countries fight so often, everyone thought that, in a couple days, the issue would settle.
But then India kicked off the worst fighting between these countries in half a century. So it led to 4 days of nonstop missiles and drone attacks. India hit Pakistani military targets, air defense systems, and buildings linked to terrorist groups. And Pakistan says it took down at least 5 Indian aircraft and struck 7 military bases.
So the fighter jets and weapons that were involved in this kind of make this a global conflict because they were provided by China, France, Russia, and the US. So all of these other countries are a part of this. But it has been difficult for us to track down exactly the details of these attacks because there is so much misinformation going on, specifically by the two governments themselves.
But we do know that a combined 60 people were killed. And the reason that fighting escalated so quickly is because it's taking place in Kashmir, which is a Muslim majority area connected to both India and Pakistan that India and Pakistan share control of.
And there's been nonstop fighting over this territory since Pakistan and India separated in 1947 from being one full country. My parents are from Pakistan, and they cannot remember a time that there hasn't been crossfire at the border or some kind of war going on there.
That's seriously crazy. I'll admit, I didn't know much about the rivalry until I was traveling to India a few months ago, and to fill out the visa, they ask on the application if you or your parents or your grandparents are from Pakistan. And my friend who was getting married said that none of her Pakistani guests' visas were approved.
Yeah, and honestly, relations between the two countries have definitely been getting worse in the past decade. It wasn't that hard to travel between the two countries before, according to my parents.
Oh, that is interesting. I guess that explains why it took 30 countries, allies of both India and Pakistan, to call them and de-escalate the situation.
And none of it worked until the US had to get involved, which they initially said that they were staying out of. So Trump announced on Saturday that the US had mediated a ceasefire and congratulated the leaders of both countries for using common sense and great intelligence.
It's just a little patronizing. But this is where it gets tricky because apparently India denies that the US played any role. And I guess Prime Minister Modi is furious that Trump announced the ceasefire before he did.
Meanwhile, the Pakistani government quickly thanked the US publicly, and Pakistani citizens were seen celebrating in the streets with fireworks. So it's just interesting to see the difference in reactions between the two countries, especially because India is a very close ally of the US and Pakistan is a really close ally of China and has very frayed diplomatic relations with the US right now.
So there's so much to get into, how can the ceasefire last if India believes Pakistan is supporting cross-border terrorism? And if Pakistan believes India will cut its water supply, both sides have high-tech weaponry and drones. So that's why we're excited to talk to Ravi Agrawal, the Peabody Award-winning editor-in-chief of foreign policy and host of their podcast FP Live, to learn more.
So India and Pakistan were on the brink of war last week, and it escalated to this point very quickly and seemingly out of nowhere, at least to the outside world. Can you kind of paint the picture of what was going on the ground when these attacks were being exchanged? Was real war a fear?
It could have been. So these are two countries that have obviously had several actual wars, and since they became nuclear powers in the 90s, they've had several skirmishes. And what was interesting this time is that they used drones for the first time in the history of their respective conflicts. And what is also interesting is both sides to their domestic audiences made very inflated claims of what these attacks had achieved. And it's only now, a few days after the dust has settled, that we're actually getting a clear sense of which of those claims are accurate and which aren't.
Oh, can you kind of break down like what was the misinformation?
On that first night, Pakistan claimed that it shot down five Indian fighter jets. It has emerged now, much later. Indian officials off the record are saying they've lost two fighter jets, but they're not being clear about which ones. What's interesting here is neither crossed the border, so they were within their airspaces. So that's one set of competing claims. Other one is the extent of damage on either side. It turns out from an investigation by the New York Times so far that it looks like India has inflicted more damage on Pakistani military air bases than the other way around. And we know this from satellite imagery. Where you can see, for example, on a very particular runway that is near Pakistan's nuclear missile command center, the runway's been damaged quite deeply, which would have made it harder for Pakistani jets to take off.
We've been reading that a part of the escalation of this conflict that you're talking about was to boost nationalism within the two countries.
On April 22nd, where this all began, there was indeed an awful terrorist attack in Indian administered Kashmir. 26 civilians died. And it was a very provocative attack, in part because the attackers, they asked all these tourists, are you Hindu or Muslim? And then they had to prove that they were Muslim, either by reciting a verse from the Quran. And if they couldn't sort of succeed there, they were gunned down. The other would be to show whether you're circumcised or not. And this really led to, across India, a real sense of outrage. So that nationalism in India, it comes from a sense that we have to deal with this problem. Pakistan's economy is failing. There is a line of thinking that if you look at self-interest, this attack, this exchange, it allows Pakistan's army to say, you need us. You need a big, strong military.
And continuing, I guess, onwards with the possibility of the ceasefire lasting, do you think that a true ceasefire can last if Pakistan down the road doesn't have access to this water?
Yeah, this is a major complicating factor. Here's the thing, India doesn't have full control to stop all of the water flows to Pakistan. It doesn't have enough dams, basically, to make that happen. So it can intermittently halt supplies and then flood. It's a very cruel form of leverage. I think for now, my sense is India is going to signal that it is going to continue to keep this treaty in abeyance. But I would be quite surprised if it went down the cruelty road, in large part because that too would not be very popular.
And so we were reading that Modi is upset with Trump for saying like he kind of made the ceasefire happen. And Modi and his officials are saying, no, he had nothing to do with it. It was all like bilateral. What have you heard about how India's feeling about the US involvement?
India's upset. There's no doubt about it. For decades, India has really focused on what is called dehyphenating India and Pakistan. So for the longest time in the United States, you would not mention one without mentioning the other. Indians hated that. Trump said that both leaders should have dinner and sort it out, and both sides are good people. Indians don't like that. Their sense is quite clear that the United States has become a closer Indian ally, not a Pakistani ally, and the United States should back the side that feels it had terrorism inflicted on it. From my own reporting, the United States was not very involved until right at the end. There was a moment on Friday when Vice President J.D. Vance told Fox News, this is not our business. We're not getting involved, which is very much part of the America First, why should we deal with foreign wars yet again? 24 hours later, Vance was on the phone with Prime Minister Modi. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, was constantly on the phone with his counterparts in India and Pakistan.
And a lot of this conversation is under the guise that Pakistani government, Pakistani military did have something to do with the attacks on April 22nd? Like, how much proof do we actually have besides what has happened in the past?
Yeah, it's a very good point. No one wants to talk about proof. They see every instance in the past as proof of the present. What we do know is that a very little known militant group called the Resistance Front, which is linked to Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is based in Pakistan, claimed responsibility and then hours later retracted that claim. Maybe because of pressure, maybe because it is, as they say, they were hacked. Where we are now is India feels that it didn't need to show the world proof. And at some level, in this America first, India first, Israel first world we are in, countries increasingly feel that they don't need to act on proof.